Namaste, everyone. Welcome to the Cārvāka podcast. This is your host, Kushalmehra. My guest today is Coleman Hughes. What is Coleman? Coleman is an author, he writes regularly. He's a musician because I heard Coleman's songs.
Mhm.
So he's a podcaster. He writes regularly for American portals, and I reached out to Coleman to talk about a very interesting subject. As we are recording this podcast today, the U.S. Supreme Court has now struck down the affirmative action. It was two particular universities against which this case was filed, if I know particularly well. It was Howard and the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, and it was filed by the Students for Fair Admissions. It was about Asian Americans and how they were being discriminated against. And I did not know this was going to happen. I just invited Coleman for a podcast on reparations and
Yeah,
affirmative action in general, but it just happened that the US Supreme Court ruled against it today. So Coleman, thanks for coming. Welcome.
my pleasure. And we're speaking on a historic occasion in American history.
So, Coleman, let's start over here. Could you explain how American affirmative action is different from quotas? Because, as you know, in India, we have actual quotas, right, for the scheduled castes, scheduled tribes, and what we call other backward classes. And now there is another category that has been created, and it was upheld. The constitutionality of it was upheld by the Supreme Court. It is called EWS, but I'm not going to get into that. But we have actual quotas in India,
Mhm.
in admissions, whether it's schools, colleges, everywhere. We have quotas everywhere. But how is it different from American affirmative action?
American affirmative action started in the very late 1960s in earnest. And at that time, there were quotas. When it started, we did have quotas. There were quotas in, government employment, in employment for federal contractors, for companies that work with or for the government. There were you were allowed to have quotas in colleges. Then that got struck down because Americans, we have a very different culture and ethics around racial discrimination, and the notion of having a set number of people of each race that can go into a space that makes a lot of Americans uncomfortable, because that is precisely the kind of racial discrimination that in the past has been leveled against minorities such as Black people, Jews. There were quotas on Jews in Ivy League colleges for many, many years in the earlier and mid 20th century. So the Supreme Court said, I believe in the 70s, that you cannot have direct quotas. You can't actually have a number, a percentage, but you can, in effect, racially discriminate in a non-quota based way. So ever since then, we've had affirmative action in the sense of racial preferences without having strict quotas. What happened today is that racial preferences in general got struck down. So starting today, colleges are not allowed to take race into account at all. They have to admit their students based on criteria that do not include race as one among many factors.
All right. So this is very interesting. I was also looking at Pew polls. This was on June 8th, 2023, which said more Americans disapprove than approve of colleges considering race, ethnicity in admissions decisions. And I find it peculiarly interesting as an Indian, and just for the benefit of everyone, I'm just going to pull it up on the screen too, so that everybody else can look at the numbers too. So this is the number where they say the percentage is, and more than pretty much half of Americans believe that race or any kind of ethnicity should not be considered when it comes to uh, admissions in colleges, schools, universities, etc. But here's my point of view. Now, I come from a society where I'm not saying my society is unique or anything. I mean, every society discriminates. Every society has had a history of discrimination. But India, when it got its independence from the British, acknowledged its history of discrimination against the scheduled castes and scheduled tribes. And We did something about it. We did something about it by giving them, at that time, the discussions in the Constituent Assembly in India, they basically said that we are going to give these quotas for a specific period of time. Now, obviously, they have gone on and increased the number of castes in the quotas, and they have they keep on increasing the limit. Initially, it was supposed to be 10 or 20 years. Then they kept on increasing the limit. I think they're going to revisit the limit in 2026.
As they
And I
say,
think
there's a saying that says there's nothing that lasts longer than a temporary policy.
yeah, it does it, and I can assure you it's going to be continued again and again. But then the natural question is that there is enough research in India that actually quotas have helped the scheduled caste and scheduled tribes especially. Now, I'm someone who's actually opposed to any other quota other than for scheduled caste and scheduled tribes, and for multiple reasons which I have explained on my podcast in the past. But there is ample research in India that quotas, maybe not in the elite institutions, but especially in primary schools and many other for walks of life, they have helped the scheduled castes and scheduled tribes.
So
Why?
you have quotas in primary schools?
Yeah, yeah, everywhere, everywhere.
How does that work? Because
So
in
basic.
India, does everyone have to go to primary school regardless, or no?
So public schools will always have what they call a 27% reservation criteria or something of that sort, depending on the caste. It depends on which caste you are, because in India, it's very weird. Like if you're born in a certain caste, right, and your caste is certified by the government itself. So in a very weird way, the state quota system kind of makes caste a birth-based system, even when, if the Hindu way of looking of it at it would be that it was fluid in its origins. But the point is, the government, to fix a problem of discrimination which existed in its society, create a birth-based system, and now it's kind of fixed castes and made it rigid. As Thomas Sowell would say, life is about trade-offs. One of the trade-offs of giving quotas is you make caste fixed, and you're always in that caste. Like as I've said many times, I am for quotas. I'm for SC/ST quotas, and I have seen the benefits of those for scheduled caste, scheduled tribe community members, and it has lifted them from many situations, whether it's in school. Now, it's very peculiar in India, minority institutions. When you say minority institutions, it means, let's say I am in a state of Maharashtra where the state language is Marathi, but there are institutions run by other people, let's say, who speak Gujarati or Sindhi, and they start an institution. Now, they don't have to follow something called the right to admission, RTE, and they can claim exemption because they are a minority. Similarly, the minority exemption is granted to religious denominations. So if it's a Christian school, a Muslim school, they will be. But if it's a Hindu school, no, they are not granted. It's because they're not considered a minority. It's very, very weird in India. But linguistic minorities and religious minorities are given the option of opting out of the quota system.
What happens if two people of different castes marry and have a kid? What caste is the kid?
I think they consider the fathers. Or in some societies, it's the mother's caste that is considered, because India is both matrilineal and patrilineal. India has two, so it's given to the states to decide. Like in Kerala, you could maybe go with the mother's side also, and in some northeastern states. But in northern India or in western India, it would be the father's side. It's like that. And the
Yes.
child
So
also has the option, right? So let's say if it's a Brahmin father and a Dalit mother, the child can always choose to be certified as Dalit. I think that they will not create a problem in that case.
So what we have in America, what got struck down today was only affirmative action in colleges. And one key thing to know about this is 99% of Black and Hispanic kids are not affected at all by this policy. 99%, actually probably more than 99%, because something like 2/3 of kids are not going to college to begin with, right? They're either not graduating high school, or they're graduating high school but not going to college. And then the rest of kids are going to colleges that have such high acceptance rates that accept, between 60 and 90% of people that apply, so that they don't need these policies in order to create a diverse student body. So my view is that this is a policy for the elites. It is a policy that has benefited the Black and Hispanic elite. And it is not a policy. People like to frame this as, okay, well, this is about access to higher education. It's nothing to do with access to higher education per se. It has to do with access to a very, very small number of elite Ivy League schools that have a somewhat inflated sense of self-importance to begin with. And plenty of, if you actually look at the top Fortune 500 CEOs in America, the CEOs of the top 500 companies, very few of them went to these schools. So we're not talking about denying access to higher education. We're talking about a policy that has benefited a very tiny elite sliver of the Black and Hispanic population. And I think that's worth keeping in mind when people say that, oh, this is about poverty, this is about access. No, it's not.
Fair enough. But then what about the historical reality of two communities in particular, Native Americans and African American communities that have faced historical discrimination in the United States of America? Now, when I was just looking at the numbers, there are clearly humongous gaps in terms of per capita income, overall educational qualification, and if we go by different parameters, the African American community is lagging behind. Now, if the quotas are not going to help, is there any evidence to the contrary that when provided quotas or when provided affirmative action, these communities do not benefit at all, or it's just not statistically significant?
Well, first of all, like I said, these policies affect 1% of Black people, right? So how could a policy that only affects 1% of a population be responsible for progress of the whole group?
Fair enough.
I think that if you look throughout the past 70, say, years of American history since like World War II, the periods where Black people have made the most progress, for example, from like 1945 to 1970, the Black poverty rate cut in half. The causes of that have been a really, really good economy, essentially. A really good economy where it's easy for lower skilled wage workers to find work. So that factor is far more important in terms of Black people making progress than a quota or affirmative action in the elite colleges, right? The poverty rate, the Black poverty rate actually cut in half before affirmative action was even started in the late 60s. So I think people like to attribute lots of the progress to this policy. In reality, there's very little evidence for that.
Yeah, I remember Thomas Sowell talking about this too in his book. I forgot the name of the book. He's written too many books, and I'm not very good at names, but I have read Thomas Sowell, and I read him with a lot of interest. But it's very interesting that Thomas Sowell uses India as a criteria to show quotas don't work. Actually, that's where Thomas Sowell is wrong, which is one of his justifications in his book. Was the Indian quota system, and I found it very interesting because I don't think he was right when it came to that. And also, for the record, to answer your questions on intercaste marriages, in 1975, the government of India had issued a notification that basically said in intercaste marriages, the children can choose the caste. The parents can choose it for the children because it comes from the reality. Like I said, in certain states in India, they are matrilineal. In other states in India, they're not. So it depends. So that's why the government came up with this notification in 1975 to change that. But then I once again find this very interesting. So I get your point of it's just the elite institutions. Okay, not the elite institutions. I get that. But what about the other institutions? Let's say institutions that are not so elite, maybe not the Ivy League institutions. I get why Ivy League institutions are doing this. I know it's just a way of maybe them feeling good about themselves more than actually helping the community in reality. And I see the point. But at the end of the day, why do these disparities exist? It's not like the American economy was not doing better from 50 years ago, right? The American economy has still kept on doing better and better. Even if it has grown at a rate of 1 or 2%, it is 1 or 2% of a giant economy, right? So it has huge effects. But why don't those effects show in the absolute numbers when it comes to the progress of the African American community if compared to other communities then?
The African American community is doing far, far better than it was 40 years ago. It's only when measured against the benchmark of white Americans who have also been progressing and had a huge head start that it looks like we're lagging. I mean, if you picture this as like a foot race, white people haven't been moving still, and they as a group had a massive head start and massive advantages. I don't necessarily see why the standard should be white Americans.
Why not, let's say, my community, Indian Americans?
Indian Americans are richer than white Americans. You have the highest incomes in the country. So, by that logic, white Americans are somehow deprived. If Indians are the standard, then white people are deprived. And then what are we even talking about? I think that each ethnic group has a different history, different culture, different geography. And all of that leads partly to ethnic groups having different outcomes. In a multicultural society, you can't have equal outcomes across the board if the groups are different, right? And what you should want is to create as fair a system as possible so that nobody is penalized for having been born into the wrong group. But this the notion of equal outcomes for groups that have totally different histories, different cultures, is a fantasy, in my view.
I agree with you on the equal outcome bit. What I find very interesting is that why doesn't American society look at the benefit of helping people? Like, why is the analogy of when you are oppressed for, let's say, 200 years, 300 years, in the case of in India, some communities, 1,000 years, when and I get the fair comparison, because even Wilfred told me the same thing. Look, the Dalit community in India, or the SC/ST community in India in total, is like more than 27%. That's a huge number. You have to do something about that. But he was like, you community, they are at best right now, I think 11.3% in the United States of America. Correct me if I'm wrong. So he's like, even the numbers change. But I still find it shocking to me. And I know Americans find that I find it shocking. They're like, why are you so concerned about these things? Because I see things working in India. I actually, now there can be debates as to, okay, at what point of time do quotas or reservations get stopped? Maybe at the second generation, third generation. I get all those arguments. But what I don't get is that when you are a community that basically did not have rights till the 1940s, 50s, 60s, there are cascading effects of those realities on the society in general, right? So why shouldn't a state, it doesn't matter which state it is, do something to give them a little bit of a push so that those extraneous factors that are created from historical realities, they don't get nullified?
So I do think a state should do something, and I think I would have supported affirmative action if I were alive in 1968 when it was being debated. I probably would have supported it as a temporary policy. And by the way, back then it used to go by a different name, compensatory justice.
Yes.
It was sometimes called, because the rationale was compensation for Black Americans specifically, as opposed to racial diversity in general. The rationale in the 70s changed to diversity, and obviously special interests and lobby groups influenced the policy, where it no longer became just about Black people. It was also about Hispanics. Asians actually benefited from affirmative action for a while before their numbers increased to the point where now they were discriminated against. So the question is not whether America owes Black Americans something, right? Like, clearly after the civil rights movement, Black Americans were owed something. Martin Luther King took that question seriously. He wrote about it in his book, Why We Can't Wait. And he actually looked at India, and he basically said, look, Black people are owed something, right? What are our options? Let's look around the world. He saw India, where, as you know, you already had a budding quota system in college admissions, and he saw that, and he pointedly did not recommend that. He said his idea was what he called a Bill of Rights for the Disadvantaged, which was a race-neutral, class-based anti-poverty program that would disproportionately benefit Black Americans, because Black people were and still are disproportionately poor, but would also benefit poor white Americans, and would be executed on the basis of class rather than race. Now, what we got instead of that, well, Lyndon Johnson sort of tried that with the war on poverty, but what we got in affirmative action was precisely the opposite, a policy that specifically benefited the Black elite, the Black upper crust, the Black and Hispanic top 1%, yet was the people in the Black community who frankly needed the least help, and yet has been justified in the language of helping the Black community as a whole.
Fair enough. To that, someone like me, from where I come from, I would say, so what Martin Luther King said was, you should have a welfare state, so welfare programs, something of that sort, right? If I'm understanding what you're saying correctly.
Yeah, even maybe deeper than a welfare state, but a serious attempt at policies aimed at helping the poor, not just necessarily giving out money. It could be reforming education in poor communities, could be many different things, but it would be on the basis of poverty rather than race.
Now, very interestingly, in India, we have both.
Mm-hmm.
We have social welfare schemes targeted on the basis of purely economic factors, along with quotas. So, so from where I come from, I don't see it as an either or argument. You could have both, is where I'm coming from. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And like I said, I think African Americans are owed that in the United States of America. The only two communities who are owed that are African Americans and Native Americans. I think they societies have done. But now about the compensation, you used the word compensation for the community in the 1960s, like Martin Luther King said. Now there's the other side of compensation, which is reparations in America.
Mm-hmm.
Now I hear random politicians in America talking about reparations here or there, or you will have. I'm very bad with names, so I apologize. But there are two particular African American speakers. I think one is a Christian pastor who comes on Bill Maher all the time. I forgot his name. He had a very nasty debate with Jordan Peterson too, and
Michael Eric Dyson.
I think that was it. And the other person was also someone who comes, and he's a professor. I forgot his name, but I find him to be very interesting too. He was a Bernie supporter at one point of time. I apologize. I'm very bad.
Cornel West.
Exactly. Yes. These two, Cornel West and Michael Eric Dyson. Now they talk about reparations, and they have a very different view. Also, it's not like their views are very similar to each other. Now, on the reparations bit, in fact, I don't understand how America is going to go about doing reparations. Now, that some of those things could overlap on the reservations issues also, because reparations to whom, right? Like, who gets the reparations? How is the American state going to figure out something like who is actually a descendant of slaves? Like, I was looking at the numbers of minorities, and I see Nigerian Americans as a group are doing very well in the United States of America, right? If I'm
yes,
they're
doing quite a bit better than Black Americans as a whole. By the way, if your position is that affirmative action should go to those who are owed, Nigerian Americans are not really owed anything. They were not here for slavery or for Jim Crow. So on that policy, would you want to distinguish between Nigerian Americans and
And that's where the
Yeah.
problem arises, which is why I say America's biggest mistake
Because
was
I
not
don't.
starting quota initially. I know it cannot be implemented today because of this whole Nigerian American issue. I know that.
Yeah, it's right now it's too difficult. I mean, and half the kids at these colleges are not descendants of slaves. Half the black kids at these elite colleges are not descendants of slaves. They are descendants of immigrants who migrated to the country post 1965, never experienced Jim Crow or slavery here.
And that's exactly where, like, if I whenever I'm with my friends in America, I always say your country's biggest mistake was not having quotas in the beginning. I think
Mhm.
it would have repaired a lot of bruises in your society, which always, kind of pop up every now and then whenever there are riots in America for
Well, we
race-based
did
riots.
have quotas. We did have quotas for several years, and then they were banned. But
Well, I
there were
just
still racial preference. I mean, no, I find it very hard to believe that if we had kept having quotas, that our race problems would have sort of been better. I find that very tough to believe. I think
but
we'd
don't
still have riots.
No, it's never going to be zero. I never said it's going to be zero. What I'm trying to say is, but at least the intention of the state matters, right?
Yeah, of course, and that's what affirmative action has been for the past 50 years. We've had that intention for 50 years, and despite it, we had, the Rodney King riots, and then we had Ferguson riots in 2014. We had the riots everywhere in the country in 2020. Where is the evidence that these sorts of policies are placating people? I don't think that there's reason to believe that.
But it's very interesting. It has worked so
Like I
well in
said, it
India.
really these policies affect the top 1% of Black people. The other 99% are totally unaffected personally by this, right? And those are the people that are likely to riot if we're having race riots. These are separate things. I mean, maybe it symbolically affects people, but this is really a policy for the elites. It's a policy that benefits the elites.
I just find it hard to believe that it's only going to benefit the elites if they would have implemented it maybe in a proper manner, because I just see the evidence to the contrary in India, and I find it hard to say that human beings behave in such a deviant manner in two societies. If people are underprivileged and if the state tries to push them, it's not like eventually everybody has to benefit from the same. Now I understand the free rider issues, and I'm not using this term pejoratively. I'm just using this term on an evolutionary level, where in evolution you have a free rider problem where you create a X is created, and then sub Y kind of benefits more from X rather than the original intent. But I don't know. Okay, then let's talk about reparations. Then even reparations are off the table then?
No, I support reparations.
That's interesting.
No, I mean, it's what I've always. I support reparations to somebody that was harmed specifically by state policy or their immediate family. I don't support it for their grandkids or their great grandkids or their great great grandkids. That's always been my policy.
So when you say how would the state, then again, it's an execution problem. So how would the state go about figuring that out then?
And they're doing it in certain places already. They're doing it in Evanston outside of Chicago, identifying Black people that try to get mortgages but were denied because of racial discrimination, and giving them a certain amount of money to go towards purchasing a house.
That's interesting. So do you think now that affirmative action is completely out of the window in the American legal structure, maybe the discussion for reparations for African Americans and maybe other communities would pick up heat again? Do you think that's going to happen?
I really don't know. Yeah, it's possible. Right now, it's mostly being discussed in California, where uh, the governor has asked a formal committee to give him a recommendation on reparations. and it would be presumably up to the state legislature to and the governor whether to actually implement it. Now, if it, I don't think that that's going to happen, but if it were to happen in California, that would be huge because that's the largest state in America, and that would sort of foreshadow it happening in the rest of the country. And I'm quite sure that the position of Black Americans after reparations will be basically no different than before. But that's my own opinion.
So why would you say it remains the same?
So what do you mean by reparations? You mean like a check?
I think it could be
Like
in
money?
cash or kind, both. Reparations could be cash and kind, both.
So what would in kind be?
It could be a targeted, like I am opposed to a universal basic income, but reparations in the form of a monthly check for underprivileged communities could be a solution.
A monthly check, like kind of a basic income for
Yes,
Black people specifically?
Black people and Native Americans could be. It's not out of the realm of possibility.
It's not. I mean, first of all, Native Americans have gotten special rights for a very long time. Special rights to casinos, which are massive cash generating operations. And how much has that helped their situation? They're still very poor in this country. Their communities are suffer from a lot of social ills. In my view, the problems of poverty are mostly not a problem of like not having cash on hand right now. Right? In the war on poverty, we gave literally billions of dollars to the poor. And what happened after that? Did poverty get better? Well, not really. We had the 80s where crime spiked horribly, the 70s and 80s, the crack epidemic, and all of this. In many ways, poor and Black communities were doing worse in the 80s. And as far as I'm concerned, the true problems of poverty are, it's not that money is not a problem at all. Obviously, it is a problem, but I think the real problems are people growing up around crime, growing up around drugs, growing up around in neighborhoods where nobody has a stable family. And those problems. There are actually poor communities where people don't have money, like poor Asian communities in New York, where like nobody has that much money, but there's no crime, there's no drugs, there's everyone's father's in the home, everyone is there's a culture of helping each other out within the community, giving, pooling your money together, giving people loans when they need it, sharing information and all the rest. And no one has that much money. Everyone's poor, but they don't have the problems that poor Black communities have, namely crime, drugs, broken family structure, etc. I don't see how those problems get fixed with a reparations check, or to me, it's poverty is not, the problems of poverty are not synonymous with lack of cash, if that makes sense.
So the solution to poverty does not always have to be just a check, right? It is never a binary choice in life. Every policy, when it is designed, it is not designed from a singular perspective. Policy making, I mean, I have a little bit of experience in this area. I have worked behind closed doors, and been part of policy making. When policies are designed, again, my experience only comes from India, right? It doesn't come from the United States of America, so we come from very different perspectives. But policies are never designed from the point of view where I have to fix this, so if I do this, this gets fixed. It's never one solution. The policy is kind of a supporting scaffolding along with many other scaffoldings in the system. Let's say, obviously, poverty is not going to be solved just by reparations. It's going to be solved by free markets too. When you have a robust capitalist society where people are constantly coming out. Now, one of the biggest evidence of that is is my country, where we had humongous poverty till the 90s, and then we opened our society up in terms of fiscal policies. And today, India has been taking people out of poverty in a huge rate. But it doesn't mean that those quotas or those welfare schemes that were very well directed towards communities that deserve it did not work. They also worked along with a parallel system of India opening up its market. What sometimes I feel that people make it that, oh, if you do this, it's not good enough. Let's assume that these things are not being done right now, right? As of now, these things are not being done. Now, nobody is expecting them to change the free market ideology of America. What people like me would say is, you can have the free markets, and maybe you have some other uh, you know policies that help certain communities too, who genuinely face. Now, as far as single parenthood and many other factors are concerned, I do understand where you're coming from, and I agree with you. In fact, I remember Don Lemon saying the same thing. It was in 2015 or 16 until he changed. I mean, he has completely changed 180 on his views on what ails African American communities. But I don't know his reasons. But the point remains that, are those the only reasons for poverty? Aren't there other reasons? Aren't these multifactorial or multivariable situations where there are so many variables at play? Why can't we fix a few?
What do you mean a few? I mean,
Let's say
we were talking about a reparations check, giving people money, and my claim was that the community will be basically precisely as bad off after that happens as before.
So where I was coming from was, what I was trying to say is that if after the check, why would they remain the same? Wouldn't the change in their financial position make things slightly better for them, in terms of maybe they could invest some of those things in their personal welfare, not just spending it or wasting the money? They could be giving that, using that money for, let's say, a better education or something of that sort.
Yeah, maybe some will. I think that's really a drop in the bucket. I think it's a drop in the bucket as compared with the structural issues. With the
So
structural. Yeah.
okay, so how would you fix those structural issues then?
So I think, first of all, I think you have to sort out crime, because very little matters if you are a kid growing up in a neighborhood with lots of crime and drugs. Little else matters. It's so difficult to grow up in such a neighborhood, avoid the pull of drugs, avoid the pull of crime, and go on to have a successful life and career if that stuff is all around you. It takes an enormous amount of willpower to resist it, and so that's something we have to get a handle on, I think, immediately. Secondly, schools are terrible. And by the way, when you have neighborhoods with crime, no businesses move in there, so there's no jobs. The businesses that are there end up, with higher costs, and then end up often just going out of business or leaving. And there are neighborhoods in America where it's just like, go to St. Louis or Ferguson, and you'll just see a row of businesses that used to be there, many of them Black owned, now empty because there was a riot or because there's just too much crime. And so you ask why there's no jobs in these places. Why are there no jobs to get in the hood? It's because the crime has made all the businesses flee. So that's, to me, primary, is stop the bleeding and get a handle on the crime. Secondly, the schools are terrible. The schools are terrible, and nothing can be done about them because you can't fire teachers, you can't fire principals. Often, if you're born in a district, you have to go to that public school no matter how bad it is. Legally, you don't have a choice if you're poor. If you're rich, you can go to a private school if your public school sucks. If you're poor and if you're Black, and if there are no charter schools in your area, because the teachers unions try to use all their power to limit the expansion of charter schools, then you're just stuck going to the shitty public school that's been failing probably for 50 years. And again, nothing can be changed about that school, again, because of the influence of teachers' unions. So Roland Fryer, who is a Harvard economist, did a study where he was able to look at about 20 low-performing public schools in Houston. And in a randomized experiment, he got to just take control of half of them. And he fired half the teachers, fired the principals, replaced everybody, and lengthened the school day, got every kid individual tutoring, and made a few other changes, and was able to significantly increase the math scores that these kids were achieving. And I think that kind of program is to me much more interesting than yet another round of trying to just give people cash. And again, I'm not against that necessarily. I think, first of all, we do already have that. We do have welfare programs in America. We have earned income tax credit. We have food assistance programs and so forth. And we've had that for a long time. And we had the war on poverty in the 70s, where it was a massive influx of cash into poor Black communities. I'm not saying I'm against that. I'm saying it really doesn't make contact with the main issues, and that we don't need a reparations rationale to just fix, like we should want to fix those issues regardless of whether they're to repair the past or not. Right? To me, that's a totally moot point. We should want to fix those issues if it was white people going through those issues, and poor white people do have their own issues, right? The opioid crisis has been horribly devastating on lower and middle class white communities, and we absolutely want to get a handle on that. It's not about repairing for slavery, which ended in 1865. It's about fixing our biggest social ills today.
So Roland Fryer is the same gentleman who had come up with the empirical analysis of racial differences in police use too, right? If I remember correctly.
Correct.
Okay, good. So I just wanted to make sure that it's the same person we're talking about. So I hear where you're coming from, and I actually agree with you on most of the things on reparations. The only thing is, I always say this: I know quotas are never going to come in the United States of America. It's out of the realm of possibility. I wish it would have been continued. I think it would have helped, because I just see the overwhelming evidence of it for the scheduled caste.
Hold on, I have to stop you there. I think one thing you don't understand about America is, first of all, we did have quotas, and when they were banned, they were only banned superficially, right? Like, many of these schools have had de facto quotas for 50 years, right? And you can look at this. You can look how Harvard has mysteriously had the exact same percentage of Asians for many, many years, even as Asian immigration has just gone way, way, way up, right? So the fact that we did have quotas, they were technically, and even before we had pro-minority quotas, we had anti-minority quotas on Jews. And we've still had de facto quotas for the past 50 years, even though they've been technically banned, right? There's nothing to stop a university, and they've all been doing it, from getting in a back room and saying, we don't want fewer than 10% of our students to be Black. And magically, they've achieved that. And maybe it changes 1% each year, but so I really resist this notion that we haven't had quotas, because while it's technically true, it's extremely misleading.
Okay, so what you're saying is that this is something like, from what I understood, certain Asian Americans would be failed in the personality test or something of that sort, right? That a personality does not qualify with what we're looking at, something of that sort, and just create criterion to reject them?
I'm not sure. Look, the way universities do it is it's all secret. How they admit students is secret. They don't have to release any of it. It all happens behind closed doors. And yet magically, year after year after year, at many of these places, they keep the same number of minority students, right? And maybe it fluctuates a little bit, but it's not fundamentally different than a quota. It's not that we haven't had quotas. Like we've had strong preferential policies which have resulted in a de facto floor that minority students never go below a certain number. De facto, that is no different than a quota. And that's what we've had for 50 years. We just formally, the notion of an actual quota that's on the school website, 12% Black at this school, that's been illegal. So you can't state it, but you can achieve it. And that's what's been happening since 1970. So I think, you understand what I'm saying?
I get it completely.
Yeah.
I get it completely. Yeah. All I was saying is I wish it would have been more formal. I think, again, everything I say is not based on an American experience. It is based on an experience in India. And sometimes in societies, some things work. I guess they don't overlap well with other societies, could very well be the case. Like I don't see like even in my stance on reservations in India is very nuanced. I don't support it for what is called OBCs and the recently applied EWS reservations. I actually oppose them because I believe
that was what I don't know anything about that issue. Explain that.
So what happened initially in India was there was something called the avarnas, people who are outside the varna system, and they were classified as the scheduled caste and scheduled tribes of India, which were around 27%, approximately 27 to 30% of our society. So they gave them a fixed quota in every primary education to be and other government offices and government jobs and stuff like that. So it started there, and then in the late 60s or mid 60s, I don't remember the year exactly, there was a committee that was incorporated by the then government of India. It was called the Mandal Commission, and the recommendations of the Mandal Commission were made, and they had recommended that while we did this census, some castes were backward and they were not taken in the quota. So we recommend another category called the other backward classes, OBCs, and they should get a quota too. This was a recommendation of the Mandal Commission. It was kept in the back burner by the government forever. The Indira Gandhi government at that time had issued this Mandal Commission, and they never took up the recommendations of the Mandal Commission. Afterwards, when the Indira Gandhi government fell, many things had happened. Then there was this government by the then Prime Minister Vishwanath Pratap Singh, VP Singh. And the VP Singh government, for political reasons, brought in the Mandal Commission recommendations and incorporated the OBC quota. Now, my opposition to the OBC quota stems from the reality that there was not enough debate inside the Parliament of India to define what an OBC is. There was not enough research done to define what an OBC is. In the case of scheduled castes and scheduled tribes in India, they were actually defined very well, debated very well, identified accurately, and there was a historical legacy of them being oppressed in India. And that's why they worked. In the case of OBCs, you will have what I said initially in the evolutionary sense, the free rider problem. There might be genuine castes that deserve to be in the OBC quota, but there will be castes that did not deserve to be in the OBC quota. And it opened a Pandora's box where today you have different caste groups in India going to the government at times, agitating violently, very rarely. Most of them are not violent, but agitating to be added in the OBC list. Now, we kept a cap of 50% on the OBCs at the federal level. But then states in India, for example, the state of Tamil Nadu has gone on and added their OBC quota more and more and more. And Tamil Nadu has a reservation of 69% now, if I remember correctly. Now, Maharashtra, the state where I am from, it is in the western part of India. They tried to add a caste called Marathas in that and another caste. And obviously the court struck it down because it was unconstitutional. It was held. I don't know why they did not hold the Tamil Nadu government 69% quota unconstitutional, but it is what it is. Even Andhra Pradesh has tried it, and this is how it is. And recently there was something called the EWS quota, which was basically people who were left out of the system, who are just poor in general, and they were now given this EWS quota, and that went to the Supreme Court, and the Supreme Court held that to be constitutional. So that's another chunk of reservations added, and how it's going to be distributed is another maze that I leave it to the government of India to to sort out. But this is how we dealt with it. So my stand has always been very much in support of SC/ST quota, not forever. I'm 100% with you that eventually there has to be a clause where these things have to stop. I just feel they cannot be stopped right now in India. That's all I say. In fact, I vehemently oppose any other quota other than the SC/ST quota, and I hope the SC/ST quota also in another 50 years is eventually weaned out as India becomes a very rich, prosperous society. Even amongst the Dalit communities, I have had Dalit scholars come on my podcast and talk about internally inside the Dalit communities. They talk about things like, okay, not after the fourth generation, we are not going to take reservations even if it is available to us outside the fourth generation, and they opt out voluntarily. We've had castes in India that have appealed to the government of India to remove them from the SC/ST quota, and the government has removed them. The entire caste group itself, they went to the government and said, look, we benefited from the system, we want out, take us out of it. And it happened. So this is how it happens in India.
Interesting. Why would they do that?
Because they felt that they don't need it. And if their people take the SC/ST seat, they are taking away of other deserving SC/ST people. So they opted out of it.
That's very magnanimous.
Yeah, I mean, it did happen. That there is a very famous case of a caste group.
I'm curious. I want you to send that to me because I've never heard of an ethnic leader going to the federal government saying, no, actually, we want less.
Yeah,
I just never heard of it.
Yeah, it's happened in India, and there was one caste, and if I remember, southern India that had approached the government, and that they basically opted out of it, and they said we don't need it, and it's fine. There are communities in India that do that, and even the Dalit community. Like I said, I've had Dalit scholars telling me this. I mean, I've had multiple Dalit scholars coming on my podcast all the time, and they've said that there are these discussions even inside the community, that they say, look, if I got reservations, my son got it, and my son's daughter got it, then I think their children maybe should consider opting out of it if through the process we are now financially secure, we have a good education, we are we don't. And as far as discrimination is concerned, there are Pew polls to show that most SC/STs now don't feel discriminated in India when it comes to the issue of caste. So it's not like there is active, especially in urban areas. Maybe in rural areas we do face these things. And I have a little bit of experience working in rural India through my policy work, so I do understand where it is, and which is where I am very sympathetic to SC/ST quotas, because I've seen the benefits, because I've personally worked on them. So I know it works because I did go out there actually on the ground and help them out. So this is the entire scenario in India, but I will send you the article. I'll email it to you, and you can study those cases.
Please do.
Yeah. So I wanted to talk about, maybe this could be our closing segment. So I wanted to talk about politics in America. Now, I sit in India. I visit America a lot, but I don't claim to be an American policy expert or an American politics expert. I just like to ask questions about America. I find the politics of this country to be very fascinating. Now, I don't want to get into wokeism, because that is the standard line everybody talks about in America, and it's actually boring to me personally. I find it very boring. It's just the American culture wars are pretty set. But I want to talk about politics beyond that. Now, I meet a new class of people who are maybe Republican or Democrats, who feel lost on both sides of the aisle now. Even in this trip, I've been here now for just 3.5 weeks approximately, and I have already met so many people. I was in California, then I went to Michigan, and now I'm in Canada. But I've met so many people that they say that, I was left of center. Like Colin's a friend. Like Colin made that famous meme, or the image of Colin, right? And Colin said, the left just changed. I met many people on the right who say the right has changed. Both sides are hardening their stances. Now, what are the possible reasons for that?
Well, okay. So in the case of the left, if you were a Democrat in like 2008, say you voted for Obama ran on a platform that was not open borders. He believed we need a strong border. He definitely didn't support reparations. He was running on really a platform that we need universal health care. And other than that, he was a very moderate Democrat. He was not pushing race-based policies and so forth. If you look at the Democratic Party in the past 4 years, everything is about racial equity, which means racial preferences and racial discrimination. It's much more basically because Donald Trump was such a hard on immigration candidate, the left has tried to take the opposite stance and said, oh, there's no problem at the border. It's totally fine. We should be as relaxed as possible. And that has led to a perpetual border crisis where you have desperate people just flowing over the border, as well as basically controlled by the cartels. And people see this in addition to it's not that the whole Democratic Party is woke, but it's that wokeness exploded in the past 10 years, and the Democratic Party has not really been against it. So the Democratic Party used to be pro-free speech. Now the woke are anti-free speech, pro-cancel culture, and the Democratic Party doesn't really stand up against that. So there's all these values that used to be much more on the left, like don't cancel people you disagree with. Everyone gets a right to say something. Even during COVID, questioning government policy about public health, questioning big pharma, questioning the CDC, the FDA, the NIH. It used to be the left-wing position to always question the government. Now, if you question the government, you're an anti-vaxxer, you're a conspiracy theorist, you're killing grandma, right? So there's a lot of things that used to be more of the liberal instinct. What the liberal instinct used to be, the Democratic Party has in many ways abandoned. So many of those people feel that, what am I now? Because they're not Republicans. So, but the Democratic Party doesn't seem to represent what they feel. So they're kind of independents, they're centrists, they're in the mushy middle. And someone like Bari Weiss, who is a very big journalist, she kind of represents that. And those are the people that many of whom listen to my podcast, listen to Bari's podcast, the Free Press, and so forth. Now, the right is kind of a different story. The right was the Republican Party was basically completely captured and wrangled by Donald Trump, who took it in a very different direction. In the 2000s, the Republican Party was basically pro-war, pro-American power abroad, pro-state building in Iraq, pro-cutting taxes for the rich, and pro-free trade, pro-libertarian economic policies. And Mitt Romney also represented that, but lost. Trump came in and he really set a very different agenda. He set the agenda that basically I'm going to run on a very strong anti-immigration platform. I'm going to reverse the Republicans' policy on war. We're going to bring everyone back home, screw all these forever wars abroad. I'm going to cut taxes for everyone. I'm going to, instead of being a free trade, libertarian, economic policy kind of a person, I'm going to instigate trade wars with China and protectionist policies so that, we can bring American factory jobs back home and so forth. He changed a lot of basic orientations of Republicans. So not only that just the way that he spoke, the kind of populist language turned off some Republicans, the sort of never Trump Republicans, as they're called, and they pivoted to the center as well. So I would say pretty much wokeism on the left and Trump on the right are what have driven different sets of people to the center, and the center has gotten bigger.
So do you have any hope for a third party option in America, or the American system is so built in such a way that the third party can never come up, and all these people can't go to the Libertarian Party that has naked people in its conferences jumping around, running around?
Yeah, no, I don't have hope for a third party at the moment. I think it's a very interesting idea, and I support the concept of it. I don't expect it to be very relevant in the short term.
Yeah, but I in a way, so again, in India, it's so different. We have so many political outfits in India. Political outfits that are based on language, political outfits that are based on caste identities, religious identities, just regular national political outfits which span the length and breadth of India. It's so interesting that in America you just have two options. You either go here or you go here, and you have to pick your choice. And I guess what you're talking about now is the number of independents, right? That's what you guys call in. There are registered Democrats and registered Republicans, and then there are independents.
Mhm.
And I guess the number of independents has kind of risen in American politics.
I believe so, yeah.
So you, I remember you voted for Obama, right?
I wasn't old enough to vote.
Oh, so where would you place yourself in the American political? I know people call you right wing now, which is very interesting. I don't I personally don't know where you stand on the political spectrum. I mean, I don't like to judge people on the basis of what they write. I would like to, give them the benefit of them stating themselves where they stand on the political spectrum.
I'm an independent. I probably would have voted for Obama if I were old enough at that time, but my first election was Trump versus Hillary, and I voted for Hillary. And then I voted for Biden. So I've only ever voted Democrat, but I'm an independent.
Oh, that's interesting. So, yeah, Trump is an interesting character for me, at least sitting in India. I used to find his speeches to be interesting, to say the least. I mean, I'm just being kind. That's all. Although I'm not left wing, I would not vote for the Democrats if I was living in America, but I would not vote for the Republicans either. I would just go and vote for the Libertarian and waste my vote. If I was in America, I can't vote for the American left or right. I would literally waste my vote on the Libertarian. So on the music bit, so you have a trained background in philosophy, right? From what I remember.
Yeah, I have an undergrad degree in philosophy.
Yeah, so I can relate to that because I have a master's in philosophy.
Nice.
And what music basically are you into? So if I was to ask you that.
I kind of all kinds of music, but I went to school for jazz for about 6 months before I got my philosophy degree, and then I've released several hip hop albums.
Nice. So what does the future look at for Coleman Hughes? Books or music or a bit of everything?
Maybe a bit of everything. I have my book though coming out in February. So
I'll definitely read it.
Look forward to that.
Comes out.
Yeah.
I'll read your book. I like your work, man. I've always been listening to you, reading you. I even saw your discussion with Brianna. I don't know how to pronounce her name. Brianna.
Yeah, Brianna Joy Gray.
Yeah, so that was a very good discussion. Mm-hmm. I've seen you have multiple chats with other thinkers. So I enjoy your content. It's a lot of fun listening to people from different cultures and different ideas. Where it's very funny. Like even in this podcast, you have an Indian supporting Quota and you have an African American saying it doesn't work. But yeah, I'm the rare Indian who supports it in America. So it is what it is. But it was a pleasure talking to you, man. And is there anything else you wanted to talk about or tell everyone before we wrap up?
No, I don't think so. I think I gotta pay attention to the news today and respond to it. So it's a big day over here.
Awesome. Yeah, you take care, man, and I wish you all the best. And hopefully, one day we'll see you in India, coming over for a tour, for a book tour in India. I think Indians would benefit a lot listening to folks like you from a
Mm.
very different perspective. So I wish
Mhm.
you all the best.
Thanks so much.
All right, guys. In the description, you'll see all the details. Coleman's social media handle, his podcast link. So go listen to his podcast. I really recommend you guys check him out. And as far as I'm concerned, you know the deal. So I don't need to remind you. Keep supporting the Cārvāka podcast. Until then, namaste. Take care. Bye.